The sun beat down on the asphalt of a small-town gas station just off the highway. It was one of those lazy summer afternoons where time seemed to slow down, and the world held its breath, waiting for something to happen. Marcus Bennett, a tall, well-built black man in his mid-30s, pulled up to the pump in his beat-up sedan. He was dressed in military fatigues, a reminder of the life he'd been living for the past few years. But there was one detail that seemed out of place. On his feet were a pair of worn-out sneakers, a stark contrast to the polished boots usually paired with such a uniform. As he got out of his car, Marcus stretched, feeling the familiar ache in his back. Those sneakers weren't just a fashion choice, they were a necessity after his recent stint in physical therapy. His last tour overseas had left him with more than just memories. While he filled up his tank, Marcus's mind wandered to the reason for his trip. After months of deployment, he was finally on leave, heading home to surprise his family. He could almost taste his mom's famous pot roast and hear his little sister's excited chatter. A small smile played on his lips as he thought about the look on their faces when he showed up unannounced. The gas station was quiet, save for the occasional whoosh of cars passing by on the highway. Inside the small convenience store, a bored cashier flipped through a magazine, while a couple of truckers nursed cups of coffee, sharing road stories in low voices. Marcus finished filling up and replaced the nozzle. He was just about to head inside to pay when the peaceful atmosphere was shattered by the rumble of approaching engines. Chapter 2. Trouble Rolls In. The roar grew louder, and suddenly a group of motorcycles thundered into the gas station. The riders were a rough-looking bunch, older men with grizzled faces and leather jackets covered in patches. They were clearly part of some kind of veteran biker gang, their allegiance displayed proudly on their backs. The leader of the pack, a heavy-set man with a salt and pepper beard, pulled up to the pump next to Marcus. His sharp eyes scanned the soldier, narrowing as they took in the uniform and the unexpected footwear. "Hey you," the biker called out, his voice gruff and confrontational. "What's the deal with the get-up? You trying to scam people or something?" Marcus turned, confusion etched on his face. "Excuse me." The biker, who will come to know as Chuck, cut his engine and swung his leg over his bike. His gang members followed suit, forming a loose semicircle around Marcus. "You heard me," Chuck growled, taking a step closer. "You think you can just throw on some army fatigues and people will start handing out discounts? I don't see no service badges. Bet you picked that uniform up at a surplus store." Marcus felt a familiar tension creep into his shoulders. He'd faced this kind of thing before, but he'd hoped for a peaceful trip home. Keeping his voice level, he responded, "Look, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just here to fill up my tank and get on the road." Chuck wasn't satisfied. He turned to his gang, playing to the audience. "You see this, boys? This guy thinks he can fool us. We've served our country, bled for it. And this punk thinks he can just pretend." The other bikers muttered in agreement, their hostile gazes fixed on Marcus. The air crackled with tension as the confrontation escalated. Chapter 3. The powder keg ignites. Inside the store, the cashier had noticed the commotion. She nervously glanced out the window, her hand hovering near the phone, ready to call for help if things got out of hand. The truckers at the counter had fallen silent, watching the scene unfold with wary eyes. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to keep his cool. He'd faced far worse during his tours overseas, but something about this felt different. This was home. This was the country he'd risked his life to protect. "Listen," Marcus said, his voice firm but calm, "I've served 3 tours overseas. I don't need to prove anything to you or anyone else. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to pay for my gas and be on my way." Chuck's face reddened, his anger visibly rising. "You expect us to believe that? A real soldier would show some respect. Where's your ID? Where are your dog tags?" Marcus felt his patience wearing thin. "My ID is in my wallet, which is in my car, and my dog tags are none of your business. I don't owe you any explanations." One of the other bikers chimed in, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, real convenient. I bet you don't even know how to salute properly." The situation was balanced on a knife's edge. Marcus could feel the weight of the moment, knew that his next words or actions could tip things one way or the other. He'd been trained for high-pressure situations, but this was different. This wasn't about strategy or combat. This was about standing his ground in the face of ignorance and prejudice. Just as Marcus opened his mouth to respond, Chuck made a fatal mistake. Whether driven by anger, alcohol, or just plain stupidity, he reached out to grab Marcus by the collar of his uniform. "You don't belong in that uniform, boy," Chuck snarled. In that instant, Marcus's training took over. With a speed that surprised everyone, including himself, he sidestepped Chuck's grab. In one fluid motion, he caught the biker's wrist and twisted it behind his back, using Chuck's own momentum to drive him face first into the side of the car. The gas station fell silent. Chuck's gang stood frozen, their tough guy facades crumbling in the face of Marcus's skill and composure. Inside the store, the cashier's jaw dropped, her hand still hovering over the phone. Marcus leaned in close to Chuck, his voice low and controlled. "I told you to back off. You don't know who you're messing with." Chapter 4. Aftermath and Arrivals. For a long moment, nobody moved. Chuck was pinned against the car, his arm twisted behind him, while Marcus stood steady, ready for any further aggression from the gang. The other bikers looked at each other, uncertain. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Finally, one of them spoke up, his voice shaky. "Hey man, maybe we should just leave." But Chuck, despite his compromised position, wasn't ready to let it go. "Call the cops," he yelled, his face red with a mix of pain and humiliation. "This guy just assaulted me. I want him arrested." Marcus released Chuck's arm and stepped back, maintaining a defensive stance. He knew this situation was far from over. As one of the bikers pulled out a phone to dial 911, Marcus could hear the guy embellishing the story, painting him as the aggressor. The minutes ticked by slowly as they waited for the police to arrive. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Marcus stood by his car, watching the bikers hover around Chuck, who was nursing his sore wrist and bruised ego. Finally, the wail of sirens cut through the air, and a squad car pulled into the gas station, its lights flashing. Two officers stepped out, a tall, broad-shouldered man and a shorter woman, both wearing mirrored sunglasses that reflected the scene before them. The male officer spoke first, his voice authoritative. "We got a call about an altercation here. Can someone explain what's going on?" Chuck immediately stepped forward, pointing an accusing finger at Marcus. "This guy's wearing a fake uniform. He attacked me when I called him out on it. We need him arrested for impersonating an officer." The female officer turned to Marcus, her expression unreadable behind her sunglasses. "Sir, is this true?" Marcus took a deep breath before responding. "No, officer. I'm an active duty soldier, currently on leave. These men confronted me, accused me of faking my service, and when their leader tried to grab me, I defended myself." The officers exchanged a glance, clearly trying to piece together the conflicting stories. The male officer turned back to Chuck and his gang. "Is that how it happened?" The bikers shuffled uncomfortably, suddenly less sure of themselves. One of them muttered, "Well, he did just defend himself." The female officer sighed and addressed Marcus again. "Do you have any proof of your service, sir?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, officer. In my car I have my full Army service uniform with all my badges and pins. I came from physical therapy, which is why I'm wearing these shoes. But I shouldn't have to explain my choice of footwear to anyone." As the truth began to emerge, the atmosphere shifted. The officer's body language changed, becoming less confrontational towards Marcus and more focused on Chuck and his gang. Chapter 5. Justice and Reflection. In a turn of events that surprised everyone, especially Chuck, the officers decided to take the biker leader into custody. As they handcuffed him, explaining he was being charged with assault and harassment, Chuck's face turned from red to pale. "What? No, I didn't do anything wrong," Chuck protested as he was led to the police car. The female officer turned to Marcus. "Sir, we apologize for the inconvenience. Would you like to press charges?" Marcus thought for a moment, then shook his head. "No, I think he's learned his lesson." I just want to get on with my trip home. As the police car drove away with Chuck in the back seat, his gang stood around awkwardly, the fight completely gone out of them. One of them, an older man with a weathered face, approached Marcus hesitantly. "Look, man," he said, his eyes on the ground. "We messed up. I'm sorry. We shouldn't have judged you like that." Marcus nodded, acknowledging the apology but not quite ready to forgive. "Next time, think before you judge someone based on how they look. Not everything is what it seems." With that, Marcus got into his car, the adrenaline from the confrontation still coursing through his veins. As he pulled out of the gas station and back onto the highway, he couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions: anger at the injustice he'd faced, satisfaction at standing his ground, and a lingering sadness that he still had to deal with this kind of prejudice in the country he'd sworn to protect. Chapter 6: Ripples of Change. In the days that followed, the story of what happened at the gas station spread through the small town like wildfire. Different versions circulated, but the core remained the same. A black soldier had stood up to a group of prejudiced bikers and come out on top. For Marcus, life tried to return to normal. He enjoyed his time with family, relishing his mom's cooking and his sister's endless stories. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, not just for him, but for the community. One afternoon, as he was tinkering with an old car engine in his garage, his phone buzzed. It was a message from a local reporter who had gotten wind of the story and wanted to interview him. Marcus hesitated. He wasn't one for the spotlight, but he realized this might be an opportunity to address the broader issues of prejudice and racism he'd faced. A few days later, Marcus sat down with a reporter in a local park. The young woman, notepad in hand, seemed eager to hear his side of the story. "So, Marcus," she began, "I've heard a lot about what happened at the gas station, but I'd love to hear it from you. What was going through your mind that day?" Marcus took a deep breath and began to recount the incident. He spoke about the initial confrontation, the escalation, and the moment he had to defend himself. But he also delved deeper, talking about the frustration and sadness he felt that people still judged him based on the color of his skin, despite his service to the country. The interview lasted for over an hour, with Marcus opening up about his experiences as a black man in America, his military service, and his hopes for change. By the end, he felt a sense of relief, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Chapter 7: Unexpected Visitor. Weeks passed, and the article about Marcus made waves in the community. Many people reached out to him, some offering support, others wanting to learn more about his experiences. The local veterans of foreign wars even invited him to speak at one of their events. Then, one sunny afternoon, there was a knock on Marcus's front door. When he opened it, he was surprised to see one of the bikers from the gas station standing on his porch. It was Bill, the older man who had offered a brief apology that day. Bill looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said quickly, raising his hands. I wanted to apologize, for real this time." Marcus studied him for a moment, unsure of what to say, but he could see the sincerity in Bill's eyes. After a few tense seconds, he nodded. "Come on in, let's talk." The two men sat in Marcus's living room, an awkward silence hanging between them. Finally, Bill spoke. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since that day," he began. "I realized I've been carrying around these prejudices my whole life, never questioning them. Seeing you that day, how you handled yourself, it shook me up, made me realize I've got a lot to learn." Marcus listened, his expression neutral. He'd heard apologies before, some sincere, some not. But there was something about Bill's words that felt genuine. "I appreciate you coming here," Marcus said finally. "It takes guts to admit when you're wrong." Bill nodded, relief washing over his face. "I'm trying to be better. I know it doesn't fix everything, but I wanted you to know that what happened, it changed me, made me want to change." As they continued to talk, Marcus felt a strange sense of closure. The pain of that day was still there, but the fact that Bill had sought him out, had come to apologize and learn, it was a sign that maybe, just maybe, change was possible. Epilogue, a new horizon. As the sun set on another day, Marcus stood on his front porch, watching the colors paint the sky. He thought about everything that had happened, the confrontation, the interview, Bill's visit. It had been a whirlwind of emotions and experiences. He realized that his story wasn't just about one incident at a gas station. It was about standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. It was about the power of integrity in the face of ignorance and the possibility of change, even in the most unexpected places. Marcus knew that there would always be challenges ahead. Prejudice and racism wouldn't disappear overnight. But he also knew that he had the strength to face whatever came his way. And maybe, just maybe, his story would inspire others to stand up, to learn, and to be better. As he turned to go back inside, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. He may have joined the military to serve his country, but he realized now that his fight for justice and understanding was far from over. It was a different kind of battle, fought not with weapons, but with courage, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to what's right. And in that moment, as the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, Marcus Bennett stood tall, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring.